let's get started. Again, as you're going to see, this is around conversations in retail. This is our 7th episode of CPFR 2.0. And it's really informal conversations to talk about specific topics for suppliers that are around the CPG retail community. So I'm very excited to get started today with the webinar. We got Stephanie Thomas, Rod Thomas, and Andy Murray. And I should actually start giving you guys a quick intro for the audience. So we got Dr. Rod Thomas. You're a professor and director of the undergraduate supply chain program at the Walton College of Business in U of A or University of Arkansas. Besides that, Rod and Dr. Rov, you've been in multiple merchandising roles around the supply chain and logistics positions at Lowe's and a few other marketing. So super excited to have you here. Now I'm going to go with you, Stephanie. You're also Dr. Stephanie Thomas and professor at the Walton College of Business. One of the key things that I want to mention to the audience is that you're the executive director of Women Impacting Supply Chain. So super excited to have you and have your perspective around retail media and the impact in supply chain as well.
Thanks, Jorge.
And then last but not least, Andy, it's a pleasure to have you. You have almost, I will call 3 decades of experience around commerce, and you're redefining commerce for CPG retail. You've been in multiple roles, SVP, customer officer of Asda. You've been in P&G. You are the co-founder or founder and CEO of Saatchi & Saatchi, and also one of the pioneers around international shopper marketing agency. I'm a big fan because you have promoted, at least on my end and my world, which is CPG, supply chain, CPFR, the concept of retail media. I've been a big follower in our NRF. And I think we're going to get started today by letting you define what is retail media to the audience. And then from there, we could get started. I think if you could get started, what is retail media, Andy?
I was hoping Rodney or Stephanie would take that call because that definition question is such an academic importance, as I've learned from working with these guys through the project. So, it's for one, there's not an accepted common definition, which is a challenge when you're trying to do research and going forward. But I think there's some generally accepted centerpieces to it, which would be you're talking about first-party data, and I'm talking transactional level data where you can see items purchased, not just total credit card receipt. So you have this first-party data. It's closed loop, which means you're able to connect that data all the way from the beginning to advertising and all the way to see what performance is. So that's the closed loop element, and it's about relevant consumer experience. So it's the purpose of being able to give the customer or the shopper something more connected to what they might be interested in, based on and more targeted based on what we know about that first party data of what's stored about that customer in theory. And so that's the promise of what it is. And from a definition standpoint, as we've done a lot of work together on the research, it's got a lot of universal agreement around that. That's a very viable promise for the industry.
No, all right, I'll add in now. I got to play professor.
Please come in, Rod.
It's an advertising-driven business model where CPGs, suppliers, brands have an opportunity to market their goods through a retailer's online and offline platforms. To Andy's point, it's enhanced by first-party data. These retailers know not only what you look at, what you were exposed to, but what you actually buy. And that's where the closed-loop reporting comes in. So they can continually refine their advertisements or their touch points with us to get better and better and more micro-targeted. It's overtaking the Facebooks and Googles. Facebook and Google knows what we look at, and then they use that as a proxy for what we're going to buy. The retailers actually know if we buy or not. And that's what differentiates retail media and makes it so powerful, because it really is, to me, and Andy can correct me here, I think it's the most micro-targeted, most effective marketing tool out there, because they're knowing each one of us on an individual level by what we look at, what we buy, what we've experienced, more and more what we contextualize and things like that.
And there's opportunities through that to reach consumers in ways that we've never been able to do before. And so it's a really exciting place to be, because I think there's a lot of trials and trying to figure out what's the right way to do this, because consumers are becoming increasingly aware that we are trying to manipulate their purchases through the ads that they see on as they go on different websites or even individual brands' websites.
Spot on. So if I could understand, if I could just reflect what I just heard. So retailers are pretty much building a mini Google, mini Facebook, in this particular way that they want to reach out to their consumers. This is a great opportunity for the CPG suppliers, which is pretty much most of our audience, to understand their consumer. What's the why behind the buy, and what's the what around the buy? And then, Andy, there's first-party data that is being created from that transaction at a store, or in some cases that happens also on a .com or web-based portal, to be able to use towards helping the consumer. I think at the forefront of retail media is how do we best help the interactions of the consumer, and the brands get access to that information. So why is this getting so much traction as of now? Why is this a movement? Why so many retailers are playing right now in this space? And what are some of the benefits that the retailers are capturing from the retailer side? But I also want you guys to stress the benefits that you get from the supply side, or the supplier side, or the consumer brand sides.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really took off because when Amazon in 2019 published for the first time in their P&L and their analyst report, how much money they were making from suppliers on advertising through their retail media, if it's like $32 billion, there was a collective jaws were dropping around the world in retail exec offices saying, we want some of that love. We're not getting any of that love. And so they quickly stood up that proposition. Amazon had an 8-year head start at building the technology to do that. So they quickly stood up the proposition, and then instead of waiting to get revenue flowing through that pipeline based on its capabilities, they help, the suppliers help fund that development somewhat through a pricing model that basically levied a tax, the most crass word, or compelled suppliers to invest at 1 to 2% of their GMV business with them in order to help fund that. And in a lot of ways, that's a very fair ask, because it's jointly building something to catch up so that everybody benefits, and Amazon doesn't, run away with the spoon, so to speak, miles and miles ahead. So it's really been its growth has come mostly through test and learn investments to say, we believe in this promise. We think it's going to grow and be and we need to have more options than Amazon in these multi-channel, omni-channel retailers. And so it's grown based on the promise. Where it will have to evolve to is based on performance. We're not, and there's some happening, but clearly there's a real link to some benefit to the supply chain, because unlike advertising on Facebook and Google, and even Amazon to some level, you need to know your in-store inventory, because if it's picked, buy online, picked in store, you don't want to run an ad in Paducah, Kentucky, that, the store doesn't carry that item. That's a waste of advertising. And the fortune of this kind of advertising, it'll know that inventory level, which is so critical with the supply chain, where it won't know that if you're doing it on Facebook. And so all of a sudden now the supply chain is like massively important and better informed.
Spot on. And I think we're going to go towards you, Rod and Stephanie. I know when supply chain comes in and retail media, I think there's great opportunities around that. Before we deep dive, I just want to make sure that the audience understands. So retail media, the retailer is providing a platform, an advertising platform to the consumer brands. The consumer brand comes in, creates an advertising. And then, Steph, if you can explain very quickly, how do the consumer consumes that advertising? Is that at a TV, at a store? Could it be an in-store advertising? Could it be just at my cell phone? Can you just explain those avenues where we consume that information? And then, Rod, please go deep into why is this important from a supply chain, just to piggyback into Andy's comments.
Sure. It can absolutely be part of an in-store experience. It can absolutely come up on your phone. What we're probably most as consumers used to seeing is going back to Amazon again, is when you type in your search for, whatever Father's Day gift or whatever is coming up, and then you get a list of products and you start to see sponsored across all the products that come up as part of that search. Those are part of retail medias. That's where companies have come in, the brands have come in and worked with the retailers to get that space on your screen and to be, you know, higher up on the screen than maybe some other options. And so as a consumer, you have to kind of start looking like, okay, am I going to rely on sponsored ads, or do I want to scroll down and find something that maybe is based on ratings or something else? So there's a whole kind of hierarchy there, but there's a lot of creative ways that information can be used, and it could come in an email in your inbox and things like that as well. I think the online search through websites like Amazon or Walmart or .com or something is the most common that we see, but I don't think that's the end of the road yet, that companies are going to continue to push the envelope and figure out new and innovative ways to try to sway those dollars out of the consumer's purse.
Andy, tell them about some of the stuff Asia's doing, how they're contextualizing some of this stuff. It's really interesting. Different parts of the world are more advanced on than we are here in the US and a lot of this forehead.
Yeah, I mean, what you see in other countries is just a bit more relevance in terms of how they've taken the relevance, and so we've got a lot of the nuts and bolts in the U.S. to do it. And we're just on an evolution curve where Asia is a little further along. It remains to be seen how fast that'll come into the U.S. But in the Asian markets, if you look at Shine, Temu, Alibaba, when they talk about relevance, what they mean also is context, and what they mean by context is they want to know. They know, like, you buy and relevance looks differently depending on where you are location wise, whether you're at a coffee shop at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon or whether you're home. And so the location is very, very important for context for them of where you are and what time you are there. And so those are the key building blocks that informs all the Chinese e-commerce in terms of relevance. And you can see very different ads on that. We're not at that level in the US, but the mechanics of doing that it's not a technology barrier per se.
Even in Europe, part of our research, some of these companies are bundling. They have more loyalty programs over there. So you might have a grocer with a mass merchant, with an airline, with restaurants, and they kind of share that loyalty information so they can give a better understanding of how we shop, where we live, what we do, so that if I book a trip to a beach, the airline's going to know, and then they're going to let a hotel know. So I might get relevant stuff on that. And then I'm probably going to get something on, don't forget your suntan lotion, you know, those types of things. So they're really hitting you from multiple angles. And again, just getting a really holistic understanding of the customer on an individual level.
And I think we have learned as consumers that this advertising works. And now that you have a Walmart Connect, a Roundel, it's also working for them, which goes back to your point, Andy. Now you're starting to create this first party data, which is consumer, SKU or product that you're buying, and then also the store. So you're starting to have location data. Why supply chain is so important around it? What's the opportunity around supply chain? I think it's the right time. I think now that the audience know what retail media is, so it's advertising through the retailer channels. Why supply chain is so important? If I go and I get targeted by an ad, Rod, and there's no inventory, obviously that's a lost sale. And maybe I'm switching to buy Andy's product rather than Stephanie's product. So tell us a little bit, elaborate a little bit more. I think you guys in University of Arkansas and Andy, you guys have portrayed some very good research studies around the use of retail media in supply chain. So can you guys start at a high level and then maybe we could go into some use cases?
Yeah. To me, it's the ultimate demand shaping tool where we can use traditional marketing levers to shape demand in ways that help our operations. I think of it as a dial. If there are certain items in certain stores that were fat on inventory, turn the dial up a little bit to increase sales just in those stores on those items. Reach out to customers within that store population that have an affinity for that product and drive sales on that. Likewise, if we're running out on something and don't have enough, turn the dial down or turn the dial up on a substitute product. So we're not disappointing customers by being out of stock. We're also being good stewards of our resources by lifting sales up on things where we probably have too much. It is a phenomenal demand shaping tool. To me, you think about what we do in supply chain. your whole business model is based around how do we collaborate and plan away supply and demand imbalances? How do we collaborate and plan so we don't have too much or too little inventory or too much or too little capacity? And we do a really good job with that, but once the inventory is already out there, all of our planning efforts, all of our forecasting efforts, if those didn't work for whatever reason, then what can we do? I think that's where retail media comes in. So it's ultimately, I see future state is it's going to become part of sales and operation planning or part of CPFR. They're going to be a critical member that you bring in to help rebalance everything.
But I think Corey, building on what Rod's talking about, is that's where we think it can go.
Yeah.
Nobody's there yet. Like the
Yeah.
potential and the opportunity is huge, but we're not, this is like crystal ball, like what could we do with this amazing tool that's kind of more with our marketing and advertising friends over here. But yet if we all partner together and shared a lot of what we have, we could make some huge effects and impacts for everybody across the organization, which ultimately benefits not only our organization, but the people that we care about most, and those being the consumers.
Spot on. This is wonderful. Anything else you want to add there, Andy?
No, I think you're right. And the questions, it's going to be kind of like, why aren't we there yet? I mean, look how long RFID's been around. Look how long electronic shelf labels. The challenge on getting there is not going to be technology. It's going to be organizational change and change management, working through incentive structures, making sure KPIs are there to measure it properly. Like, how do you measure results in this space? What's going to be acceptable? And so, like, these guys know, the technology usually in retail, especially supply chain, it's been available. It's just a matter of getting the right driving forces and organizational change in place to take advantage of it.
I think you're spot on. And as I was having a few conversations with Rod and Stephanie before this meeting, one thing that stood out to me is even when you start to look at the customer supply chain teams and the marketing teams that are for each CPG brand that is supporting a Walmart, an Amazon, a Target, they work in silos. So I think, and I'm going to be straightforward, right? If we could bring the sales and marketing teams to work very closely with the supply chain teams to ensure that you're using it as a demand shaping tool, I think it could be extremely powerful. And it's not only powerful to say, we're just going to increase sales at all costs. No, it's going to be based on the capacity that I have at my own distribution center. Maybe my, I don't know, New York distribution center that is supporting this Target and Walmart stores. It's actually full of capacity. Let's just go ahead, Andy. You're my marketing peer. Let's just go and accelerate the sales lift with a few media because we know we have some consumers that have affinity in the New York area. Let's just go push for some inventory there. Or the other way around, I think, Rod, you mentioned markdowns. And I do have to mention that we do work with many suppliers that are having markdown challenges, and this is being a new avenue. It is not connected technology-wise, but the biggest challenge is how do we get the marketing and the supply chain, the customer supply chain team together to use this tool, Walmart Connect and Walmart Illuminated, to be able to really do a sales lift with advertising in the locations that you have consumer affinity to be able to tackle. So it's interesting. How do you guys think as experts that we attack this change management and organizational problem, Andy and Rod and Stephanie?
I'll start.
Yeah,
go ahead,
Andy.
Andy.
No, go ahead.
In NRF, Andy used the term, we need an orchestrator or a maestro for retail media and really all of it. And to me, I think that comes back to the old school merchant. They're kind of like the CEO of a category or group. If you get the merchant on board, because they have a toe in both areas. They work in supply chain, they work with marketing, they work with ops. You can get an advocate there and it's an easy sell to them. If you talk about, hey, we can increase your sales, we can increase your inventory turnover, we can increase your margins, we can reduce your markdowns, and here's how we can go about doing it. I think you're laying out a process and a use case for them. You're going to have to start small. You're not going to get access to those systems immediately. There's not a button in any of those systems for a retail media enhanced supply chain. But I know I'm not a computer programmer or a computer scientist. I know with if-then statements, I could kind of do 20 stores of, if you're a little too fat on this, or if we're getting ready to go into markdown, why not run retail media ahead of time and do a little natural experiment and see, take a group of 20 stores, treat them just normal markdown, take another group of 20 stores, use some retail media ahead of time, and compare and contrast of what did the markdown actually end up being relative to what you had to spend on a little bit of a retail media buy.
Are you seeing that the industry, specifically around retail, are they already recognizing this cross-functional, cross-organizational opportunity that exists where you have, so it's interesting because you got the supplier. The supplier will have their sales and marketing team, and they will have also their customer supply chain team. You're going to have the merchandiser from a retailer perspective, which also have below them the replenishment managers. But then you also have now folks, Andy, that are selling retail media, right? Because the retailer now is also trying to sell retail media to the consumer brand. So is the merchandiser the one that is in charge today in reality to kind of consolidate everything that is happening between the relationship, the supplier collaboration between a supplier and a retailer? Or is there a different role? Where do you see this playing? And what's the state of the industry today? Is this happening already? Is this still too early and we're trying to figure out first retail media and then tie it back with supply chain? Can you guys give us your outlook on your state of the current industry?
I think it's happening through where there's collaboration across silos and functions. I mean, it's a real challenge. And there's not, you typically have your retail media stood up outside of merchandising in a separate revenue team with a different P&L. Some retailers have created a joint venture with and stood up a completely different company, like KPM, Tesco with their separate pieces, Sainsbury's with Nectar. So it runs the gamut in terms of how it's set up. But it's not just the organizational leadership, but there's also most retailers a lot of data and a lot of different data sets. And so the data integration you have to do it doesn't all sit in the same place. And so you've got to go through quite a bit of work, heavy lifting to get the data architected in a way that you can pass and integrate through that. And that is a very difficult challenge. Even looking at Walmart with Illuminate and trying to eliminate, you'd think all the data is there, but for what was provided through Retail Link, it's been a real challenge and they're doing it. But it's a bit of a rebuild in terms of how you have to get your data aligned in a data strategy to do it. So it's not an easy lift, even though it looks like it should be all connected. Today, it's not. And you have to be careful because when you're trying to serve retail media ads, you've got to be on the same latency speed structure of e-commerce and how that's moving. And so you can't have, an ad kind of slowing down the page loads because it's got to go check and integrate with, 15 different things of, where's the inventory at? And, those things have to be super, super fast, millisecond fast. And if it's not, it's not going to work. So they don't have the luxury of building it poorly. It's got to be done well. And that's a heavy lift.
Well, and Jorge, I think one of the interesting things too about all this with retail media, and you kind of hit on this a minute ago, is with these relationships, that retailer, supplier, or brand CPG dynamic is completely changed. We're not just selling to you, now we're buying from you. And so, with the retailer hat, I'm used to acting one way and demanding maybe something. Well, now I'm trying to woo these partners to invest in this new platform and this new model and a new way of doing business. And you've got to shift how you manage that relationship and how you bring all those people. So even the internal relationships and the collaboration is extremely challenging to get all those different people in different areas together. And then you have the cross relationships, the different people on the other side of the the CPG side. There's a lot of different hats that people wear there. How do we collaborate all together? And, as Andy said, the change is hard. Getting people to do things differently and think differently is really hard. So I think this is an area that we're all excited that there's some really cool potential here that could have some really neat ramifications. But we're all going to have to get out of each other's way and get on the same page to be able to make it happen.
Given the dynamics between a supplier and a retailers are starting to change, I do see, again, if I sit down here on the shoes of a supplier, and now that I'm being sold a platform to advertise, I think what it's exciting to me as a supplier is, okay, fair. I think if they're selling me something, there's going to be value, right? I'm gonna be able to kind of monetize. I'm gonna be able to better understand my consumer. But now, wow, now I could influence my destiny. I think it goes down to the concept of demand shaping. The fact that these retail medias are starting to open up, as a supply chain practitioner, I say, whoa, now I could start to influence a little bit more my forecast. I could have a better handle of what my forecast is going to be in the future. It's not going to be perfect. There's always going to be variability because we cannot influence what competitors are going to be promoting. But it gives me a tool to really win at the retailer. So I think with that dynamics that you're mentioning, Stephanie, I think we need to work even closer. We need to be working more as a partnership more than dealing in a sell to buy model. So anything you guys want to add in terms of that? Anything else you want to add in terms of those dynamics, especially around CPG suppliers?
Here's what I would say. The unifying factor of what should bring everybody together to collaborate and break down those silos is this relevant and is this going to help the customer? If this is good for consumers, then everybody in all these organizations and these different parts should rally around that and come together. And part of it will be a function of education. People don't look at retail media. Most people don't look at retail media as a supply chain tool yet. I mean, that's why we're on here and we're trying to promote that. It's a marketing tool. It's a sales driven tool. The more you educate people across organizations, the more value you can show and tie it back to, we all have the same customer. Yes, we're all trying to get our little piece of the pie and drive profitability for our organizations or our bonuses within our organizations. But at the end of the day, everything we do should come back to the consumer experience. I think that's the best way to go about it. I know Andy's got thoughts on this. I'm trying to embrace my inner Andy Murray there and be customer centric.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And what the work that still needs to be done in the industry is defining what do we mean by relevance and what's a relevant experience and, you know, what's in it for the customer. And I think that North Star has to be there for the future. And some retailers have gotten into the game because they see the opportunity for high margin, like 80 margin, you know, revenue, in a world of retail, that's pretty high revenue margin. And so but it's not, when I think many are finding out, it's not as easy to get as they thought. And because we haven't touched on this, because there's no standards, then you can only deal with so much complexity. And I think, you know, the supply chain probably has been dealing with standards as well. I don't know how big retailers work. I don't know as much about logistics and supply chain, but you know, how many different variations of measurements and standards are there in the supply chain world? They've probably been wrestling with those issues a lot longer. And I think supply chain people in those conversations could probably add some help to that, because I'm sure we've got EDI standards, right? We've got standards out there, and that was a long journey to get there, to come up with those standards. And so we're, I think, at the beginning journey of standards, and the other side of it, if you want to take, because I think Rodney or Stephanie might have said this is nothing more than a supply chain problem. And, you know, if you take supply chain expertise and look at all those elements, the whole industry would benefit.
You're hitting a very good point, and this is just sparking some thoughts as we speak. You're super right. It took a while to standardize EDI and the data flow between a retailer and a supplier. Now we're starting to get into an era of standardizing the flow of intelligence. And it's the flow of intelligence knowing, whoa, if I know I'm going to be selling a little more in this particular store because I'm going to be advertising, well, I need to make sure my supply chain adapts. So that's a very good point. And that's something that we definitely need to push of how do we really start standardizing those flows of intelligence, not only the flow of data. Because I think you said it, Andy, it's not just about a flow of data where I'm just getting my first party data. We need to be able to connect the advertising also with my supply chain and all the data sets together in a very quick speed by product availability to be able to make sense of this. But I also don't want to scare people. It goes as simple as, well, if I have a Walmart Connect or a Target Roundel, let's just bring Stephanie, the marketing lead, with Rod, the supply chain lead. We know we have product availability for this particular stores. Let's just test the advertising through some of those tools. And if we start to see that it works, let's just go ahead and push it. I think what I'm hearing from you guys is we're in the very, very beginnings of this type of dynamics, and it needs standardizations, it needs process and controls around technology and obviously security. And it also needs, but I think at the forefront, organizational alignment. Anything else that you guys want to add into the conversation? I do want to finish with the consumer, but I'm going to stop there to see if you guys have anything you want to add around the dynamics that is shifting right now.
Well, I think you talked about how all these different retailers are bringing up their different media networks, and as it's been mentioned multiple times, some of it is we see shiny dollars, and so we're going after it. You know, on the CPG side, you want to see a benefit out of that, and so at some point in time, you're going to go, I'm not just going to keep giving everybody money. I'm going to only give the money to the people that are working with me, that I see results from, that we are sharing that information, we're getting that impact. And so I think from the retailer side of things, you can't just assume that you keep going back to this well again and again. You've got to show some results, show some outcomes, because this is now a customer of yours that you're also having to work with. So on the CPG side, I think you go, okay, start pushing the retailers a little bit more on, okay, give us that data, and let's talk a different direction than maybe just, this is cute that when people log on at this time of the day, this happens. It's okay, well, what does that mean moving forward? And how could we use that to further increase sales, have inventory in the right place, or shift inventory to places that we need it to be?
That's such a good point. And I think that ends up with the entire collaboration between retailers and suppliers. Rod, I don't want to let slip the comment about consumer. And you guys, I think, outlined some of the benefits of retail media for consumers. But Andy, this is a question for you. What are some of the drawbacks, right? You're selling, there's a lot of more media platforms with this new retail media. What are some of the drawbacks that we're seeing for the consumers?
Well, there's some real risk that if the relevance isn't there, the ad load is too much. And we're already hearing kickback from, Amazon shoppers that, too many sponsored ads. Look how long you got to scroll down to find organic. That's a risk for the shopper. There's all kinds of risk. I mean, some retailers are allowing conquesting, which means you can buy the competitors' exact brand names. Up until recently, Walmart wouldn't allow that, but that's changed. And what happens if I put in, 85% of searches are done on a category level, if not higher. And if I go in and put in Folgers coffee, I pretty much want to get Folgers coffee. And if Maxwell House buys all of the search ads on that keyword, I got to get through now more stuff that's not relevant if I'm a pretty loyal shopper and that's what I want, right? So there's a risk that that the ecosystem will not have a customer-centric filter built deep into the algorithm that, really protects and keeps that, because there's a lot of financial pressure to get as much money as you can from that. And I think that's where that's at risk for the consumer. However, at the same time, the Chinese model for looking at context and relevance is so good that they can actually have about 20% more ad load than even an Amazon, and the consumer doesn't even feel it because they're so good at relevance. And so I think if, that's just, we have to get relevance at the top of the list on the conversation. Otherwise, there's a real risk you could annoy the consumer in ways that's just not helpful.
The only thing I would add to that is they need to think about market segments too. There are some consumers that don't want that level of personalization. They don't want Big Brother watching them and knowing everything they're doing. So there's a privacy issue of consumers have to have the right to opt out of some of this or opt in through loyalty programs and things like that. So working that out, that micro targeted that I was talking about marketing efforts, you also need to use that to build customized segments. There's some people that absolutely want 500 ads a day, and there's some people that want 100, and there's some that don't want any.
Hold on, Stephanie, I think you were going to say something.
Hey, that's what happens when you're married to people, like you speak the same language. So I was basically going to say what Rod said. So.
You guys are connected. Well, I do have a question, and I in terms of challenges and drawbacks from the retailer supplier collaboration. I know we spoke or we stressed some of the positives and benefits of the dynamics that retail media is creating in sales and marketing, advertising, and supply chain. But what are some of the drawbacks that you saw you see right now in this dynamics?
All right, let me start. We've done research. We've interviewed dozens of people over the last couple of years. The best quotes we get are on this issue because if I'm a merchant, I put on my old merchant hat, I'm used to telling you as a supplier, Jorge, here's what you're going to do. The power dependence dynamics are very different. All of a sudden you walk down the hall and now you get to beat up on me. You're now the buyer, I'm now the customer, and both sides are having trouble doing that. In particular, the retailers. You know, they need to change that mindset of all of a sudden this supplier that I've been squeezing for decades, they're now a customer and they are one of my most profitable customers. To Andy's point earlier, advertising revenue, it's 60 to 80 points of margin. They don't get that on most of their products. So these retailers are phenomenal at treating consumers very well and thinking how we need to work with them. They need to do the same thing with their supplier partners and their CPGs when it comes to retail media, because they are probably their most profitable customers now.
Anything else you guys want to add? No, I think there's a big change in dynamics. And I think if I could stress, especially you guys that are in Arkansas, collaboration is huge. And I think one of the benefits is that we need to enforce better collaboration between suppliers and retailers. And I think also better collaboration internally, right? Last thing that I do want to kind of share with the supplier community, similar to how the sales and operations planning or S&OP process came in line from within organizations where you brought the marketing team together with the sales, manufacturing, supply chain teams, and finance. Hopefully we could start to see that within the customer supply chain teams supporting Walmart, Target, and the main retailers, not only from a CPFR, but with the collaboration in mindset. Anything else that you guys want to bring, any key points around retail media supply chain? I think this has been extremely beneficial for the community.
I think one of the challenges is having talent in this space. Is, you know, it is new. It is a new way of thinking. It is newer technologies. Being on the forefront of something, everybody's trying to figure it out. So it means you can't just pluck people from one place or another and know what to do. And so I think it's as companies are bringing more people in to be part of, whether it's the retail media network team or the various teams across the supply chain, of looking for people who do think bigger picture, who are collaborative in nature, who can think interdisciplinary and go cross lines. I know a lot of times I'll talk to students after they've graduated and they're like, you know, I miss when I was a student, I was having all these different classes. And so I was learning things from a variety of different perspectives and I could see how it all fit together. And then you get into a role and here's your lane and you're supposed to stay in your lane. Well, we need them to go back to like an education experience of where you are thinking and learning about problems and challenges and ideas and opportunities from a variety of different perspectives and working with people that can help you there. And that's maybe a reevaluation of who we're bringing onto the team. And you've got to have strategic thinkers and out of the box thinkers and people who aren't stuck for a textbook, answer, because we need new ideas and new perspectives to make this successful.
Love it. Anything else you want to add, Andy, Rod?
No, I think you're hitting on all the right issues. Yeah, good job.
I greatly appreciate you guys. I think, Stephanie, this is a great way to finish. Let's continue to push redefining commerce. Andy, thank you very much for bringing your concepts of retail media. Rod and Stephanie, I greatly appreciate connecting the dots around supply chain and retail media. This has been fantastic. So thank you for your time and enjoy your Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, gang.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.